Radar Update. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. Looking at the timeline, we're at some very important commemorations and Bible readings that are going on right now. We are at a time where we're at a 12-month marker for multiple things that we saw last year coming together here, particularly the peace and safety warnings, which means that sudden destruction is coming. We are also at the 12-month reminder for purification and the 12-month marker for the sign of Jonas, which a lot of people noticed. Now, the sign of Jonas was spread out over several days, so it's really hard to nail down exactly when it started, but you could see a summary there in the dotted box. All we know is we're at a threshold time in this window where we are approaching 12 months, reminding us of so many different things. Celestial signs that we saw last year, geopolitical events that reminded us of biblical stories and similar prophecies about judgment coming, the sudden destruction, and now we're at a time where those memories are coming back to 12 months, but also at the same time where we are at a threshold with the celestial signs too, the Shiloh sign and the sign of the Son of Man, and at the same time that biblical readings are happening on the calendar at this exact same time that go with the story brought to our remembrance by the celestial signs, particularly Jupiter at opposition, that marker. And we've definitely seen how the enemy knows how that's very important, and they actually know what time it is on the calendar. And they know what events are going on right now and what is the expectation. They know the gathering is any day now. The Good Shepherd is going to gather his other fold. And we always got to keep in mind, the enemy does not know the day or hour either. But they know a range, and they are investigating the patterns just like we are. So the enemy has times of high expectation just like we do. And they're still watching at this time, and they're still emphasizing particularly these days where we're at right now. Both sides know this time is extremely important and are continuing to watch. And we talked about the wise men's journey. We're at a time where we should expect to see the king. Just like the wise men, their attention was drawn by celestial signs that started their journey. Likewise, we saw significant great signs that hadn't happened in 2,000 years, and that started our journey. And we've learned so many things, and we've even seen more celestial signs since that journey started. And so here, right at this time of expectation, we also see the same pattern of the wise men's journey, and we studied the biblical account of that too. The Bible tells us he came the first time, and we are to look for him the second time. Which means we have to look into the patterns and the events that happened in the first time. That's going to give us a good clue for what we should be looking at in expecting him to come the second time. We should see so many parallels with the Star of Bethlehem reminders, so many parallels with the wise men and Shiloh and the lion and leading into the woman. There's so many parallels that we should expect to see this second time. But that means we have to do our homework and understand what happened the first time. And that helps limit in our understanding too, in addition to the context of all the other prophetic things that we see. So this time is a time of high expectation. We're at approximately 37 weeks marking a pregnancy picture with the sign of the Son of Man. And again, that's only what it is. It's only a picture. It's only a rehearsal. He's already been born. It doesn't mean the Shiloh sign is going to stop. It just means that pregnancy rehearsal picture is also starting. And it also means, from what we're going to look at later today, that there's higher expectation that we should be seeing other events related to the tribulation happening even more so now that we've reached this point. That's all it means. It just means that that picture has also started on top of all these other pictures that are also going on right now. And because we know the biblical timing of what's associated with seeing that sign, particularly the end of that sign, the conclusion toward the Revelation 12 point, there's higher expectation to see the other prophetic events that are tied with the timing. And to see that here at this threshold tells us that there's about to be a transition between different themes. We've also seen an increase lately with the calls for peace and safety, and tied to events with Israel. There's definitely been a lot more with Israel in the news. And we particularly see the Paris Middle East Conference coming up in a couple of days, and they're going to have 70 countries coming together, trying to revive the peace process there. It should catch your attention that right here on this threshold time, where both the enemy and we are looking with high expectation around here, that the subject of many coming together, trying to work on a covenant with Israel, it should catch our attention that this subject is being brought up in mainstream news right now. This is a prime time for someone to come onto the scene, making a covenant with many because they're already talking about it and making steps toward that right now. This is a perfect time for multiple events to come together. And we also see a significant prophetic marker coming up in a couple days, the New Year for trees. That's strongly associated with the replanting of Israel. Right at the same time that they're having that conference too. There's a lot that tells us we're on the threshold of multiple prophetic events coming together here. Our attention has been pointed to this time. When we watch and when we look at what Christ told us to look at, and the prophetic events we're told to look and observe, we will know where we are. We will have an understanding of the time and an understanding of our expectation when we should look up and know that our redemption is drawing nigh. And I've also noticed that Damascus has been in the news lately as well. On December 22nd, water stopped flowing to the majority of the city. And so for the past 2 weeks, Damascus, the capital city there, has had some significant water issues. And you don't realize how important water is till you can't get it. And this has definitely caused a lot of problems there, and it's not going to get better. They've been able to rehabilitate some 120 wells, and so now they can meet 1/3 of the city's daily needs. Only 1/3. The city's hurting. Things are getting worse in that area, and attention is being drawn toward Damascus more right at this time when we see other prophetic events happening. This should catch our attention. We do not know the day or hour, but we do see that time is quickly running out. And it should also be mentioned, when you reckon the midnight hour based on 12 months, which is a typical biblical pattern that we're going to look at in the next video, the end of the third watch is on the same day as New Year for the trees, the 13th and 14th of December. That would be approximately when a third watch picture would end, right here at this time. So we are in a very important time. Let us rehearse what we've been shown. Let us study these timelines. Let's look at all the patterns and pictures and prophetic events that are coming together and how the enemy is also looking at this time as well. Definitely download our resources, Time of Perplexity, which talks about the tribulation spiral events, the events that happened before the Revelation 12 sign, the events that happen in the first half of the tribulation. The tribulation hasn't happened yet, but the Bible describes it as a time of perplexity. The first half of the tribulation is completely different than anything else the world has ever seen. And then also download the Be You Ready guide, which rehearses many of the guidelines and warnings and exhortations that Christ gave his servants of what we should be doing as we have expectation of seeing our King. And then definitely download the SHILOH booklet. It is a book. There's a lot of information in there covering so many subjects. It is a reference book. There's a lot to study in there, and a lot of questions are answered by the material that are in there, and it does us good to review it just to keep in mind things particular to the first time Christ came that we keep in mind to hedge our understanding of the second time. Right now, Jupiter is around the arm of what is considered the stars of Virgo. And this is going by the International Astronomy Union chart. But again, we've said this so many times, there are so many different configurations for Virgo other than the International Astronomy Union one. If you go to Google and type in Virgo constellation, you'll see even a lot more different configurations that people use and different astronomy programs use. But that's not the International Astronomy Union chart. And so we don't go by configurations to determine our understanding of prophecy, although we do consider some of that for reference. We consider other things that are more solid and more sure. And we've been looking into the heavens, how they are divided out, and particularly this section of Judah, of the lion. And because there are so many perspectives and approaches to understanding the constellations and the borders and the configurations, the best bet is always to go with Scripture. How were these prophetic events viewed from a biblical perspective? And also, what is the biblical approach to astronomy that we should have, particularly when trying to understand prophecy? What guidelines does the Bible tell us for understanding the heavens and how we should be interpreting them? And we've been looking a lot at the Chaldean astronomy perspective because that was the gold standard for thousands and thousands of years. And it's mentioned throughout Scripture that that was the case. And multiple people in prophecy were connected with Chaldean perspective of astronomy. So we have to keep all that in mind when we understand how were they viewing those prophetic events, particularly the ones relating to celestial events. How did they see it? They saw it differently than we see it with our modern perspective. But also, just by itself, the Bible tells us so many directions and guidelines for how to view the celestial events. And we've talked about in Psalm 19 and Job 9, it tells us about the ecliptic line in the heavens, of where this story is along that the heavens declare. And the Bible tells us very early on from the time of Job and Abraham that the ecliptic is divided into chambers. Chambers of the south is what it's called, because that's typically where they're best seen at and observed. But the ecliptic line is divided into different chambers and different sections. And how they define borders and the different chambers is different than how we do today. But going with a biblical perspective of it, how did they divide it into chambers? They divide it into chambers along the ecliptic line. And so that gives us great direction for understanding where the borders are going to be pegged to. But then the Bible also tells us that the celestial stars, from a prophetic perspective too, are divided among the 12 sons of Jacob. The ecliptic line is divided into 12 chambers. The Bible tells us this clue, particularly with the characters involved with the Shiloh prophecy. Jacob, he understood this. The Bible even mentions that he fully understood Joseph's dream and he took note of it. And then he gave the Shiloh prophecy. So the Bible tells us they're divided into chambers. It's divided among the 12 sons of Jacob. And we talked about before how they're equally divided. That's how they did it back then. And there's some constellations that are bigger than a particular spot. This is why you don't necessarily go by the stars that are associated with particularly what we consider a constellation today. We go with what section it is. That's how the Bible viewed it. What section, what chamber has the focus? Because some of the star groupings will be larger than the chamber size, no matter how you slice it. Aquarius being one, Virgo being another, Leo being another. And particularly when we consider also the Chaldean stars that they use too, which aren't shown on this map. But the ecliptic line is divided equally into 12 chambers. And so this is what we've been looking at right now. We're in the Judah chamber. We're in the lion chamber, the chamber that would be associated with the lion. So irrespective of the constellations that we're familiar with, the lion shapes, the chamber is what is important, but also considering the stars that are within that particular chamber. And we also talked about how the Chaldeans divided the ecliptic. What point of reference they used to divide it was Jupiter opposition. But we need to keep in mind the reason they chose Jupiter as the clockwork mechanism to divide out the heavens was not because of its location where it was necessarily, but because of how long it took to go around the ecliptic. There is a time element. It takes about 12 years to go around the ecliptic, so that helps divide it into 12 equal portions. Jupiter at opposition, though, is another time length. And so Jupiter at opposition defines where the borders will be, but it's also a time length. Each chamber is 13 months long. See, it does not matter where Jupiter is in relation to those borders if it is within that 13-month chamber duration. Jupiter is going to be considered to be in that chamber, regardless of where it is, it's going to be considered to be in that chamber for 13 months. And only when the lawgiver defines the next boundary will it change. The lawgiver, the scepter, is going to be in that chamber, dwelling in that chamber until he makes the next boundary. So a chamber is when Jupiter is at opposition, and then plus 13 months is opposition plus time. And we got to always keep that in mind, the time element. This is a celestial clock. It moves in clockwork motion. And it is divided among time because that's the way Jupiter moves. It moves in certain periods of time. That defines the chambers. And again, just looking at opposition, March 8th, when it defined that boundary, immediately Jupiter was in retrograde motion. It was moving westward. Immediately it left outside of the boundary areas. It was going the other way. And so where Jupiter is not important as long as it is within that 13-month chamber duration. So you could be going the other way outside of the section it just defined, but as long as it's within those 13 months, that chamber has the focus. That is where the lawgiver is. That's where the scepter is. It's within that 13-month duration. And it will continue to go for that time, but then it'll reach the next opposition marker point, and then it'll spend 4 months before it turns around and comes back to where it is going to find the next boundary. And then once the lawgiver declares the new boundary, that's when it'll start heading westward again, but it has started the 13-month chamber duration for the next chamber. The chamber equals opposition plus time. It is within time. The lawgiver is not going to move until that time is up. The scepter is not going to depart until that time is up. So right now, the chamber that has the focus, the time where we are right now, is the lion, the Judah section, the Judah chamber. Particularly, as we talked about in the Shiloh booklet, the chamber that also includes both the hind feet of the lion. And that's exactly where opposition started and drew our attention pointed straight to that. One is a modern foot of the lion, and then the other one is the Chaldean hind foot of the lion, Zavijava. So it caught our attention even early on when we first noticed opposition. We noticed that it was off to the west of the hind foot. So both the hind feet are within this chamber, even the boundaries of the chamber. And this is where the lawgiver is going to be. This is where the scepter is going to be until the next boundary is even made. The next boundary doesn't even exist yet because the 13 months aren't up. And we also talked about the particular movement from Jupiter opposition where our attention was pointed to and drawn initially because God wanted our attention drawn to it. We've noticed how the path and trajectory of Jupiter also reminds us of the scepter, the shepherd's crook. We talked about that, and it's also in the Shiloh booklet. So right now we are still in the Judah chamber. We are going to continue to be there for the duration of this chamber. And this is also why it does not matter what happens with the pregnancy cycle. That has no bearing on the Shiloh sign or the chamber because it's time-based. And again, we talk about a lot of this in the Shiloh booklet. There's a lot of technical reference in there, a lot of explanation too as well. We walk you through a lot more fulfillments that we've been looking at with it. But I hope you have noticed the cover of the Shiloh booklet because there's a lot on just the cover that we could talk about. Because the bottom part shows the first time Christ came. And the bottom star map shows where Jupiter was and what it did the first time Christ came. It circled Regulus, highlighting the king who is coming, and then went through a pregnancy motion in a chamber at that time that was assigned to the woman. And he came the first time, and we are to look for him and expect him to come a second time. And we also know that he's going to be making an appearing to pick up his purchased possession before he physically comes back to rule as king. But we also know that the Revelation 12 sign is telling the world that the king is coming again. The events that happened the first time are going to be repeated, but on a second level. But a lot of the same events are going to be happening just at a different level, and some are going to be concluding. And so we understand the time where we are right now by looking back at the first time. And when we look back at what has happened the first time, that guides our understanding with where we are right now. And what signs we see right now, what signs we even know are in the future. In Matthew 24, verse 3, the disciples asked Christ 3 specific questions. When shall these things be? Different prophetic events relating to the end times. When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming? And this is very important because a lot of people look at the Revelation 12 sign and they say, oh, that's a sign for the rapture. No, Jesus already told his disciples what the sign meant. His disciples even asked him, what shall be the sign of thy coming? And they're talking in the Messiah concept. When are you coming as king to set up your kingdom? So notice the disciples plainly asked him in English, when and what shall be the sign of thy coming? What sign is going to tell the world that you are coming? Now notice they understood what a sign was. A sign does not tell you the event's going to happen on that day. No, a sign tells you about something what's coming up further down the road. And this is definitely what we need to keep in mind, especially with prophetic events. Signs are given about something that's going to happen in the future, not at that point. There are so many signs that are warnings of something that is about to happen or will happen later. The fig tree prophecy, the peace and safety. There's so many things that are signs for something that is upcoming. And when you see the sign, you know it is coming. And so this is what they're asking. What is going to be the sign that will inform the world that you are coming, not at that point, but you are coming shortly after that point? What sign is going to be seen that you are coming? What sign is going to tell the world that your arrival is just up ahead? And again, also note that they asked when. When is this sign going to be seen, and what is going to be the sign? This is so easy. We have the same questions today. What is the Revelation 12 sign about? And again, it should catch your attention that there was a sign given before Christ came the first time. That's what the wise men saw. There was a sign that he was coming. And even John the Baptist, when he declared Jesus as the Lamb of God, that was also a sign that he was going to be coming and arriving as king in 3.5 years later after that point. There are different signs that something is coming up in the future. Not at that moment, but on the road ahead. So what was Christ's answer to what shall be the sign of thy coming? So Jesus answered them, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Pause for a moment. He's answering the disciples' question here. When? When is this sign going to be seen about the sign of his coming? He says, well, these events are going to happen. That will tell you the when. And there are going to be some pretty impressive events too. You're not going to be able to miss it. The stars are going to fall from heaven. The powers of the heaven are going to be shaken. This is going to be, as he also describes in Luke, the parallel passage, this is going to be a time of perplexity. This is why we call our book the time of perplexity, because this is what Jesus himself called it. There's going to be some amazing events happen before you see the sign of his coming. And that's going to tell you you should be expecting to see the sign of his coming. So he's telling them the when. When all this stuff happens, and then. That's when it's going to happen, disciples, after those particular events. And when you compare that list there to the tribulation seals, he's describing up to the 6th seal of the tribulation. He said tribulation events are going to be underway. Some very incredible, perplexing tribulation events are going underway already before the sign of his coming happens. The time of perplexity is going to happen, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Disciples, you want to know when the sign's going to appear? It's going to appear after the time of perplexity. You want to know what the sign is going to be of my coming? It's going to be the sign of the Son of Man. That's going to tell the world that I am coming. Not that I'm there, but that I'm coming. Because he goes on to describe additional tribulation events. And again, keep in mind, he's giving a condensed overview here. He goes on to describe, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, which they're going to do at the end of the tribulation, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Disciples, there's going to be a time of perplexity, then a great sign in heaven. The great sign is telling the world about a great event that's coming up. The greatest prophetic event, Jesus Christ the Messiah coming back to rule and reign for 1,000 years. That great sign is pointing to that great event. And disciples, when you know who the Son of Man is, you'll be able to recognize the sign of the Son of Man, which is going to be seen after tribulation events start. They haven't finished, but they have started. And the sign and all the events surrounding the coming of the Son of Man are all related to understanding who is the Son of Man, what is the story of the Son of Man. The more you understand the Son of Man, the better you understand the sign of the Son of Man that is warning the world that he is coming. Jesus answered the disciples' question. The Revelation 12 sign, which rehearses the birth of the Son of Man, is the sign of the Son of Man telling the world that he is coming. He's not there yet, but there's going to be some perplexing events that are going to happen before that, and then it will appear. So this hedges in our understanding now, particularly when this chapter, Matthew 24, he tells his disciples other signs of what will be for the rapture. He even goes into the parable of the fig tree, which is a sign relating to Israel being reborn, that prophetic events are going to be winding up within that time frame. And then he gives other signs that his disciples are to look for related to the rapture. And it's not the sign of the Son of Man, because that's related to his coming. And so this guides our understanding. Jesus told his disciples here in this passage, while they're sitting down talking to him privately, he says, this is going to be the sign of my coming, and these are going to be the signs I want you to look for relating to the rapture, to the gathering. They are separate. And so the Revelation 12 sign has nothing to do with the rapture. He told them separate signs in this chapter that relate to the rapture, and that the sign of the Son of Man, the great sign that happens after tribulation events have started, that is totally about the coming of the Son of Man. So again, definitely download the Shiloh booklet. We talk about the great sign in heaven, the Revelation 12 sign, which is the great sign of the great event that's going to happen at the end of the tribulation, and how it has nothing to do with the rapture. Jesus told his disciples separate signs to look for that relate to the rapture. And he told his disciples quite clearly there was a sequence of events, and then, that things would go in. So this is what we base our understanding of prophetic events on. Not our thinking, not other people's opinion. What did Jesus say and what did he tell his disciples the signs meant? It'd be foolish to consider anything else. And this hedges our understanding for where we are now because we understand what Jesus said about that great sign and what's going to happen before it. And so that helps back our understanding back to where we are now and understand where we are right now. Of understanding other prophetic events are in the future and there is a sequence that is going to be unfolding. And we have already seen signs, particularly the peace and safety sign and other signs that tell us that we are at that threshold between where those two events meet up. When we understand the different parts of the sequences, we understand where we are in time. We understand the time. But we have to look into God's Word and go with what He told us. When did Jesus tell His disciples that the Son of Man was going to gather His bride? He tells them right in that chapter. And He told us what signs we should be looking for, and this is what we see on the radar right now, coming together at this threshold time. We have seen so many signs telling us that sudden destruction is coming, so many warnings that destruction is coming. We have the full expectation that around here very soon is going to be our Exodus, when the Good Shepherd gathers his other fold, when he picks up his purchased possession. We also see in the future other prophetic events and transitions and sequences about to start, and that hedges our understanding also of where we are now. So definitely download the timeline. Links are in the description box. Download the Shiloh booklet. Study it. Read it. There's a lot of technical information in there that we have to keep in mind because it helps inform us of what we should be looking at. And definitely download the resources, the Shiloh booklet, and the Time of Perplexity, and most importantly, the Be Ye Ready Guide, because that is what Christ told us to focus on most importantly as we see the day approaching. We have the expectation of seeing Him face to face, so let us purify our lives, let us rise up, let us trim our lamps, and let us go out to meet Him halfway, serving Jesus Christ first and highest above all else. Maranatha!